A man who could not sleep invented a friend, and that friend told him the truth about the world. The strange part is how much of it was true. The empty buying, the hollow jobs, the lonely and angry people, the debt wrapped around everyone like a chain. Tyler Durden named all of it, decades before it grew into the world we live in now. He was right about the sickness. He was right about almost everything. And he was right about nothing, because the man giving the answers did not exist. And the cure he offered would burn everything down. That is the trap at the heart of this story, the reason millions fell for a warning and mistook it for a hero. Tonight, we follow the whole thing, from a sleepless office to a row of falling towers, and the quiet truth hiding behind the fists and the fire. Welcome to Serial Soul. Let's get into it. Section 1. The Man Who Could Not Sleep. The story begins with a man who cannot sleep. We never learn his name. The movie came out in 1999, right at the turn of the century, and it drops us into the life of a regular office worker in a regular American city. He has a steady job. He has a clean apartment up in a tall building. He has money saved, and furniture he chose with great care. By every standard the world had taught him to measure himself by, his life was working. And he had not slept, not really slept, in 6 months. That is where the whole thing starts. Not with a fight, not with a fire. With a tired man lying flat on his back in the dark, eyes open, feeling like his own life is something happening to a stranger in the next room. When a person goes long enough without sleep, the world stops feeling solid. Edges get soft. Time slips. The man tells us himself that when you have trouble sleeping, you are never really awake and you are never really asleep. You just drift through the days like a copy of a copy of a copy, each one a little more faded than the last. His job is the first thing the movie wants us to understand, because his job quietly tells us everything about the world he lives in. He works for a big car company, but he does not build cars and he does not sell them. He is the man they send out after the crashes. When a car has a part that fails and people get hurt or killed, he flies to the place where it happened, walks through the wreck, and does a piece of cold math. He counts how many of that car are out on the roads. He guesses how many will break the same deadly way. He works out how much the company would have to pay the families of the dead. Then he compares that number to the cost of fixing every car. If fixing them all costs more than paying off the dead, the company does nothing. The cars stay on the road. That is his work. He carries other people's worst days in a briefcase and turns them into numbers on a page. A man can do a job like that for a long time and tell himself it is fine, but it leaves a mark. It teaches him, day after day, that a human life can be weighed on a scale and traded for a few dollars saved. He stops feeling like a person and starts feeling like a part in a machine, doing a small, ugly task so the machine can keep running. He is good at it. He is calm and polite and empty, and the emptiness is starting to leak into the rest of his life. So he does what the world told him would fix it. He shops. His apartment is a small museum of things he picked from catalogs. There is a famous moment early in the film where the camera floats through his rooms and little price tags hover in the air beside everything, like the whole place is a page you could order from. The lamp, the table, the clever set of plates with tiny flaws in the glaze, so you know a real person made them. He bought each piece believing it would finish him, that this one chair or that one couch would be the last he would ever need, and then his life would feel complete. He even has a name for the pull he feels toward all of it. He says he was a slave to the catalog, to the deep itch, to build the perfect little nest out of objects. The trouble is that the nest never works. He buys the couch and feels settled for a week, and then the itch comes back and points at something new. The plates lead to the right glasses, and the glasses lead to the right table, and on, a path with no end. He is filling a hole with stuff, and the hole is not the kind of hole that stuff can fill. The film puts a simple idea right at the center of all this, an idea that turns out to be true. The things you own end up owning you. You think you are buying freedom. You are buying a list of things to dust and insure and worry about and replace. The man worked a job he hated to earn the money to buy the things he was told would make the job worth it. And the circle just kept turning, and somewhere in the middle of it he forgot how to sleep. This is the part of the movie that almost everyone agrees about, and it is the part the people who made it meant with their whole hearts. The director has said plainly that the film is poking fun at this exact way of living. A world full of people built to hunt and fight and survive who now have nothing to hunt, nothing to fight, nothing to do but shop and wait. The ache the man feels is not made up. It is not a trick. Most people who watch the film feel a flicker of it because most people know what it is to be busy and comfortable and quietly miserable at the same time. They know what it is to own a lot and feel like none of it is theirs. The first thing this story gets right, before any punches are thrown, is the sickness. It looks straight at a soft and safe and well-fed life, and notices that something underneath it is starving. But a man cannot fly to crash sites all week and then lie awake all night forever. Something has to break, and here the film gives us the strangest, saddest, most human turn of the early part of the story. He finds his cure in other people's pain. A doctor refuses to give him sleeping pills and tells him he does not know what real suffering is, and that if he wants to see it, he should visit the men dying of a certain cancer who meet in a church basement. The man goes, meaning it as a kind of dark joke, and something cracks open in him there. The room is full of people facing the end of their lives, and in that room nobody is keeping score, nobody is climbing a ladder, nobody is selling anything. They hold each other, they cry without shame, and the man who has spent years turning grief into numbers finds that he can finally cry too. He presses his face into the chest of a large, gentle man named Bob, a former bodybuilder whose body has turned against him, and he weeps, and for the first time in half a year that night, he sleeps like a baby, so he gets addicted to it. He starts going to support group after support group for sicknesses he does not have, blood diseases, failing organs. He builds a whole hidden week out of borrowed sorrow, pretending to be dying so he can feel alive, leaning on strangers so he can rest. It works. As long as he can let the feeling out in those rooms, the world goes quiet and sleep comes back. There is something almost tender about it, and something deeply wrong with it at the same time, and the film lets both of those be true without rushing to judge him. The man is not cruel. He is drowning, and he found a strange piece of driftwood to hold on to. Look closely, though, and you can see the same problem that ran through the shopping and the job. He is still not facing his own life. He is borrowing other people's. He is treating the deepest griefs of dying men as a kind of medicine he can take and then walk away from clean. The cure is built on a lie, and a cure built on a lie is always living on borrowed time. What the early part of the film is showing us, slowly and carefully, is a man who has tried every answer the ordinary world offers and found that none of them reach the place that actually hurts. Work did not reach it. Money did not reach it. Owning beautiful things did not reach it. Even the borrowed tears in the church basements only held it off for a night at a time. He is a person standing in the middle of everything he was promised would make him happy. And he is more lost than he has ever been. And he cannot say why, and he cannot sleep. That gap, the space between the full life he was supposed to have and the empty way he actually feels, is the open wound at the heart of this whole story. Everything that comes later grows out of that wound. The fighting grows out of it. The wild ideas grow out of it. The destruction grows out of it. None of it makes sense unless you first understand the quiet, suit and tie despair of the man we meet at the start. Because everything that happens to him is his broken attempt to fill the hole that the couch and the savings and the safe little job could not fill. And it matters that the film does not treat this man as a fool. He is not stupid, and he is not weak, and he is not unusual. He is, in a way, the most usual man alive, which is exactly the point. He is what a person becomes when they do everything right by the rules they were given, and the rules turn out to be hollow. He followed the map perfectly and arrived nowhere. Millions of people watched this character and felt a jolt of recognition because they had followed the same map. The man on the screen, lying awake at 3 a.m, is doing the thing they do. He is staring at a life that should feel like enough and wondering why it feels like a waiting room. His own voice carries one line over those early scenes that lands like a small stone dropped in still water. He tells us that this is his life, and it is ending 1 minute at a time. He is not being dramatic. He is stating a plain and frightening fact about himself. Every minute he spends in the meetings and the airports and the catalog rooms is a minute of the only life he has, and it is leaking away while he sleepwalks through it. And some part of him has finally started to notice. That noticing is the first true sign of life in him. It is the moment the patient first feels the sickness, instead of just living inside it. He has named the problem now, even if he could not put it into words. The shopping is not the answer. The job is not the answer. The borrowed grief is not the answer. He is a man with a hole in the middle of him, sitting in the richest, safest country at the richest, safest moment in its history, slowly starving for something he cannot name. The film has spent its first stretch building this man so completely that we feel the hunger in him as if it were our own, which is the exact moment the story is waiting for. A man this empty, this tired, this ready for something to mean something, is a man standing at the edge of a cliff in the dark. He does not need much of a push. He just needs to meet the right person at the wrong time. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And on a late flight home, somewhere between one gray city and the next, he was about to meet a stranger who seemed to have walked out of every cage. The man was still trapped. Inside, a stranger who looked free in every single way the man was not. Section 2. The stranger who seemed free. The man met Tyler Durden on an airplane. They were sitting side by side on a late flight, two strangers in a metal tube above the clouds. And at first it was nothing. But the man had a private habit on planes. He thought of everything up there as single serving. The tiny tub of butter, the little packet of sugar, the small bar of soap in the bathroom. Even the people, he figured, were single-serving manserfenfens, the kind took to for one short trip and then never see again. So he expected this stranger to be the same. A face for an hour, then gone. Tyler was not like that. Tyler talked back. He was loud and quick and funny, in a way that cut right through the dull hum of travel. And he had an answer for everything, and he did not seem the slightest bit afraid of anything. He told the man he made soap, that he made it and sold it, and he said it like soap was the most important thing in the world. Everything about him was sharp and alive. He dressed in clothes nobody else would dare to wear. He moved like a man who had never once in his life worried about looking foolish. Sitting next to him, the man felt gray and small and half asleep, the way he always felt, except now there was someone next to him who made the difference impossible to ignore. Here was a person who appeared to have escaped every trap the man was still caught in. The man worked a job that turned dead people into numbers. Tyler worked for himself with his own 2 hands. The man owned a stack of careful furniture that he polished and worried over. Tyler looked like he owned almost nothing and missed none of it. The man could not sleep, could not feel, could not cry without borrowing someone else's funeral. Tyler seemed to feel everything, all the time, on purpose, and to like it that way. They traded a few words and a way to reach each other, and the plane landed, and they went their separate ways. The man thought that was the end of it. Then he got home and found out he no longer had a home. His apartment, the little museum he had spent years building one careful purchase at a time, had blown apart. Something had gone wrong with the gas, the building said. The whole place was gutted. Everything he owned was either burned or scattered down on the street below. His clever lamp and his clever plates and his last couch he would ever need, all of it sitting in a sad pile on the pavement for strangers to step over. The man stood there and looked up at the black hole where his life used to be, and he felt something he could not have planned for. He felt almost nothing. And under the nothing, faint and strange, he felt a small, dangerous flicker of relief. He stood at a payphone trying to decide who to call. He thought about reaching out to a woman he had met. He did not. Instead, he dug out the way to reach the soap salesman. From the plane, the only person he could think of who would not look at his ruined life and feel sorry for him, he called Tyler. They met at a worn-down bar, the kind of place with sticky floors and dim light and not many questions, and they sat across from each other with their drinks. And the man tried to explain how it felt to lose every single thing he owned in one night. This is the conversation the whole movie has been walking toward. And it is where Tyler stops being a funny stranger and starts becoming something much bigger in the man's mind. Tyler listened to him grieve over the furniture, and then he said the thing that turned the man's world upside down. He told him the stuff had never been the man's freedom. The stuff had been the man's cage. Tyler put words to the exact feeling the man had carried for years without naming. You buy the couch, Tyler said in his own way, and you tell yourself the couch problem is solved forever. And then you keep adding the right dishes, the right bed, the right curtains, until one day you are trapped inside your perfect little nest, and the things you used to own start owning you instead. The man had felt this for years. He had lain awake inside it, but he had never once heard another living person say it out loud, and hearing it said felt like a door swinging open. Everything he had quietly suspected about his life turned out to be a thing a person could just come right out and admit. The job, the savings, the careful purchases, the whole game he had been playing so well. Tyler treated all of it like a sad joke that smart men should walk away from. And the man, who had spent 6 months unable to sleep inside that joke, leaned in. Tyler kept going. He said the world was full of men working jobs they hated to buy things they did not need. He said they had all been raised to believe they would grow up to be rich and famous and special. And slowly, quietly, they were learning that this was a lie, and it was making them angry in a way they could not even feel yet. He said that trying to fix yourself and polish yourself and improve yourself was an empty exercise that led nowhere, a way of fussing over the surface while the real thing rotted underneath, and that maybe tearing yourself down to nothing was the only honest way left to grow. He said it was only after a person had lost everything that they were finally free to do anything at all. To a man whose everything had just burned to the ground the night before, this did not sound like madness. It sounded like the truth arriving right on time. The fire had taken his cage. Tyler was telling him the fire had set him free. Then they walked out to the parking lot, and Tyler asked him for a strange favor. He asked the man to hit him as hard as he could. The man did not understand. People do not ask to be hit. Tyler explained it the way he explained everything, quick and sure and a little wild. He said, "You cannot know anything real about yourself until you have been in a fight." He said he did not want to die without any scars. He kept pushing, kept asking, until the man, awkward and embarrassed, swung and clipped him on the ear. And then Tyler hit him back, hard, in the chest, and the man doubled over. And something happened to him that had not happened in years. He felt it, all of it. The pain, the shock, the blood rushing in his ears, the cool night air, the rough ground under his feet. For one bright second, he was not a copy of a copy of a copy drifting through a half-life. He was a body, awake, here, now, fully inside his own skin for the first time since he could remember. So they kept going. They stood in that empty parking lot and traded blows until they were sore and bleeding and laughing. Two grown men beating on each other. For no reason anyone watching could understand, and the man had never felt so alive. What was being born in that parking lot was the cure the man had been hunting for through the whole first part of the story. Shopping had not reached the empty place in him. The job had not reached it. The borrowed grief in the church basements had only held it off one night at a time. But this reached it. The fights reached it, fast and clean and real. Where everything else had been soft and safe and quietly killing him, this was hard and sharp and shocking, and it shocked him back to life. The man had been numb for so long that he had forgotten numbness was even a problem. A single punch reminded him, and the ideas behind it landed just as hard. Look at what Tyler was actually saying, underneath the strangeness of it, because this is the part the film means honestly. He was saying that men had been handed a soft and shallow life and told to be grateful for it. He was saying that all the buying and earning and improving was a way of hiding from the fact that none of it filled the hole. He was saying that comfort had become a trap, and that the men inside the trap were starving and did not even know it. The man had lived every word of that without being able to speak it. Now a person stood in front of him, speaking it plainly and offering, on top of the words, a way to feel awake again. It is no wonder he followed. Almost anyone that empty offered that much life would have followed too. This is also the moment to be honest about why so many people who watch the film fall for Tyler exactly the way the man does. Tyler is not wrong about the sickness. He is the second voice in the story, after the man's own sleepless misery, to look straight at a soft modern life and name what is broken inside it. He sees that people drown in stuff. He sees that work without meaning hollows a person out. He sees that a whole crowd of men are quietly furious and have nowhere to put it. Every one of those things is true, and the film knows it is true, and the film lets Tyler say all of it with full force and real charm so that the audience feels the pull right alongside the man in the story. The seduction only works because the diagnosis is right. But notice what has quietly happened by the end of this stretch, even if nobody in the story has noticed yet. The man has not been handed a way to build a better life. He has been handed a way to feel something, which is not the same thing, though to a starving man they look identical. The fire took his old cage and he is grateful. He has not asked yet what is going to be built in the empty space where the cage used to stand. He has traded a quiet, comfortable kind of suffering for a loud, bloody kind of relief. And the relief feels so good that he is in no mood to ask hard questions about the man giving it to him. He moves out of the wreckage of his old life and into Tyler's world without much of a fight, because there is nothing left to hold him back. Tyler lives in a huge, broken-down, half-abandoned house, the kind of place with no real heat and water that runs brown and rooms full of dust, and to the man it feels more like home than his spotless apartment ever did. The careful nest is gone. The single-serving life is gone. In its place there is a strange new friend, a strange new house, and a strange new feeling pulsing under his skin that he chases like a man who has just learned he was thirsty his whole life. The man has found his answer. That is what he believes, standing in that ruined house, beside the freest person he has ever met, sore and grinning from a fight in a parking lot. He has found the thing that work and money and stuff could never give him, and he is not about to question it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The trouble is that the parking lot did not stay empty for long. Other men started to notice the two of them, swinging at each other in the dark. And some of those men, it turned out, were just as numb and just as hungry and just as ready to feel something as the man had been, and they did not want to watch. They wanted to step into the circle too. Section 3. The basement where men woke up. It started with two men in a parking lot, and then it stopped being two. Other men had seen them out there in the dark, swinging at each other behind the bar, bleeding and laughing. And instead of calling for help or backing away, some of them felt a strange pull toward it. They wanted in, so the fights moved out of the open air and down a set of stairs into the basement of the bar, a low cement room that smelled of beer and damp. And more men kept coming, week after week, until the basement was packed with them. Office workers, waiters, delivery men, young guys and tired older ones. They came after dark, told no one, and formed a tight ring in that ugly little room. And inside the ring, two men at a time would fight. Before the fighting began each night, Tyler would climb up where everyone could see him and lay down the rules, and the rules became almost holy to the men who heard them. The first rule was that you do not talk about Fight Club. The second rule was the same as the first, said again harder so nobody could miss it. You do not talk about Fight Club. After that came the rest. Only two men to a fight, one fight at a time. No shirts and no shoes. A fight went on as long as it had to, and if it was your first night there, you had to step into the ring and fight. No watching from the edge, no staying clean. Everyone who came down those stairs had to bleed. The secrecy was half the power of it. These men shared the biggest thing in their lives, and they shared it with each other completely, and then they walked back up into the daylight and said nothing. A man you fought on Saturday might ring up your groceries on Monday, and the two of you would lock eyes for half a second and feel the whole secret pass between you, and neither of you would say a word. They belonged to something now. They had a brotherhood that the rest of the world could not see. And carrying that secret made even their dull jobs feel different. Because every one of them was hiding a second life that felt more true than the first. What the fighting did to these men is the thing the film wants us to understand, and it is the strongest case the whole story makes for Tyler being right. These were men who had spent their lives being told to sit still, stay quiet, work hard, and want the right things. They had soft hands and soft jobs and a soft anger they could not explain. Down in that basement, for a few minutes at a time, the softness burned off. A man would step into the ring scared and stiff, and he would take a punch, a real one, and the fear would crack open. And underneath it, he would find something he did not know he had. He would find that he could be hit and not break. He would find that he was tougher than his whole gentle life had ever let him prove. The man who tells us the story watched himself change along with the rest of them. The fighting reached into him and turned a dial that shopping and money and borrowed grief had never been able to touch. After a hard fight, he said, everything else in life had the sound turned down. The boss who used to make him sweat became a small, gray, harmless thing. The work that used to feel like a slow death became a joke he could barely stay awake through. Problems that once kept him up at night now seemed like nothing, because he had felt the floor of himself, the very bottom, and the bottom had not killed him. A man who has touched the bottom and lived stops being afraid of falling. He even started wearing the marks. He walked into his clean office with a split lip and a black eye and dried blood on his collar, and he did not hide any of it, and he did not care who stared. The fights were rewiring him from the inside. There is a moment where he tells us that Fight Club became the reason he kept his hair cut short and his nails trimmed down, because a long fingernail or a loose bit of hair was just one more thing that could get torn off in the ring. His whole body was bending itself around this new center of his life. The empty man from the start of the story, the one who could not sleep and could not feel and could not cry without borrowing a stranger's funeral, was filling up with something at last. One night, a familiar face appeared in the basement. It was Bob, the big gentle man from the cancer group, the one the man had once pressed his face against and finally cried on. Bob had found his way to Fight Club, too. He had lost the safe little circle of weeping men, and he had landed here instead, in the ring, throwing punches and taking them with the rest. Seeing Bob in that crowd ties the early part of the story to this one with a single thread. The same men who once held each other and wept in a church basement were now beating on each other in a bar basement, and both rooms were doing the same job. Both were places where men who could not feel anything anywhere else came to feel something. The fighting had simply found a louder, harder way to do what the crying had done. Away from the basement, in the broken-down house where they now lived together, Tyler kept teaching the man, and one lesson cut deeper than all the rest. They were standing in the kitchen, and Tyler took the man's hand and held it down flat, and then he poured a burning chemical onto the back of it, the kind that eats into skin and will not stop. The pain was enormous. The man tried to do everything he had ever been taught to do with pain. He tried to picture himself somewhere else, somewhere calm and far away, the way people are told to ride out the worst moments. Tyler would not let him escape. He told him to stay. He told him to feel it, every bit of it right now, without running and without pretending he was anywhere but here. And then Tyler said the hardest thing in the film. He told the man that he had to stop trying to control everything and just let go. He told him that this, the burning, the now, the pain he could not run from, was the most real moment of his life. He told him that a person cannot truly live until they have given up, until they know deep in their bones, not just in their head, that someday they are going to die. Most people spend their whole lives pretending death is something that happens to other people far away. Tyler was forcing the man to look straight at the fact that his own clock was running, that his life was a small and ending thing, and that only a person who has truly accepted that is free to actually live the time they have left. It is a brutal scene, and the man weeps and shakes through it. And yet, underneath the cruelty, there is an idea that is hard to argue with. A person who is terrified of pain will arrange their whole life around avoiding it, and a life arranged entirely around comfort and safety can quietly become a kind of cage. The same cage the man had been living in with his furniture and his savings. Tyler was burning the lesson into him on purpose, telling him that pain is not the enemy, that pain is the thing that proves you are alive and reminds you that your time matters. The man, from the start of the story, had spent 6 months numb, drifting, half dead inside a safe life. Now he was being taught, the hard way, that feeling everything, even the bad things, was the price of being awake. Step back and look at what Fight Club was actually giving these men, because this is where the case for Tyler is at its strongest, and the film does not pretend otherwise. Here was a whole crowd of men with no real outlet for anything. They had grown up in a soft and peaceful time, with no great struggle to throw themselves into, and no clear way to prove what they were made of. They had been handed comfort and told it would be enough, and it had not been enough, and they had no idea what to do with the restless, aimless energy buzzing under their skin. Fight Club gave that energy somewhere to go. It gave these men a place to test themselves, to feel their own strength, to be fully present in their bodies for the first time in years. It gave them brothers. It pulled men back from the edge of a gray, sleepwalking life and shocked them awake. For a while, that is genuinely what it was. A room full of lost men who walked in dead and walked out feeling alive. The man stopped needing the support groups. He stopped needing the catalog. He stopped lying awake at night. The hole that nothing else had reached was finally being filled, night after night, in the basement of a dingy bar, by the simple, ancient, honest act of a fair fight between two willing men. The diagnosis that Tyler had laid out at the bar, the idea that comfort was killing them, and that men needed something real to push against, was being proven true right there in front of everyone. Every single week, in flesh and blood and bruises. The man had never been happier. He belonged somewhere. He had a friend who seemed to understand the world better than anyone, a brotherhood that needed him, and a body that finally felt like his own. If the story had ended there, with a basement full of awake men and nothing more, Tyler would have looked like a strange kind of healer, a man who took the broken and made them whole again. For a brief stretch of the story, that is almost exactly what he looks like. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously, but a basement was never going to be enough for Tyler. That was the part the man did not see coming, because he was too busy feeling alive to notice the look in Tyler's eye. The fights had given these men back their courage and their strength and their hunger, and now there were dozens of them, then hundreds, all of them loyal, all of them awake, all of them looking to Tyler to tell them what came next. A crowd of fearless men with nothing to lose is a powerful thing, and Tyler had begun to think about what such a crowd could be pointed at out there, beyond the basement walls, in the wide world that had made them all so numb in the first place. Section 4. The men who lost their names. The basement could not hold it for long. Word spread the way secrets always spread, quietly and quickly, and soon there were fight clubs in other cities, other basements, other rings of men beating the numbness out of each other after dark. Tyler had built something far bigger than the two of them swinging in a parking lot, and now he had hundreds of men in town after town who would do almost anything he said. They trusted him completely. He had given them back something they thought they had lost forever. And a man will follow you a very long way once you have done that for him. So Tyler started pointing them outward. At first, it was small. He began handing the men little jobs to do out in the world, the way a teacher hands out homework. Go pick a fight with a stranger, he would tell them. And here was the strange part. Go pick a fight and lose it on purpose. Most people will do almost anything to avoid a fight. Tyler wanted his men to walk straight into one and take a beating and learn that the world did not end. He sent them out to cause small bits of trouble, to break the smooth surface of ordinary life, to remind the city that it was full of men who were no longer asleep. It felt like mischief. It felt like a game. The men loved it. Then the game grew teeth, and it got a name. Tyler called it Project Mayhem, which is just a fancy way of saying a plan for chaos, a plan to make trouble on purpose. And this was where the thing that had started as a way to heal lost men began to turn into something else entirely. Tyler did not want every man for Project Mayhem. He wanted the strongest and the most loyal, the ones who would not ask why, and he came up with a test to find them. The test was cruel and simple. A man who wanted in had to come to the broken-down house where Tyler and the narrator lived, and he had to stand on the porch and wait. Tyler would open the door and tell him to go away. He would tell him he was too old, or too fat, or too weak, that he would never be good enough, and then he would shut the door in his face. And the man on the porch had to keep standing there. No food, no kind words, no promises. Just hours and then days of being told he was nothing, while he stood still and took it. If he broke and left, he was never wanted in the first place. If he stayed long enough, through the insults and the hunger and the cold, the door finally opened and he was let inside. Only the ones who could swallow all their pride and obey without question made it through. Think about what that test was really doing. Back in the basement, Fight Club had been about waking men up, about making each man feel his own strength and his own life. The porch test did the opposite. It taught a man to give up his pride, to take abuse without fighting back, to obey a voice telling him he was worthless. The cure had quietly flipped into its own opposite, and almost nobody inside it noticed, because it still wore the same face and used the same words and was run by the same charming man they all loved. The men who passed the test moved into the house, and the house filled up with them until it was packed wall to wall. They shaved their heads. They dressed all in black, every one of them the same. They stopped using their names. Around the house, the narrator started calling them the Space Monkeys, because that is what they had become, little creatures sent to do a job they did not understand and were not allowed to question. They cooked and cleaned and worked in shifts. They made soap by the crate to sell for money. And in the back rooms, away from the light, they had started building things that were not soap at all, things meant to burn and blow apart. The men gave up everything that made them separate people. That is the heart of what went wrong, and it is worth sitting with, because it is the cruelest joke in the whole story. These men had come to Fight Club to escape a world that treated them like nameless, faceless parts in a giant machine. They had hated being cogs. They had hated working jobs where nobody knew them, and nobody cared, and they were just a number on a page. And now, chasing the feeling of being free, they had shaved their heads to look identical, dropped their names to become no one, and signed themselves over to a leader they obeyed without a single question. They had run from one machine straight into another. The only real difference was that they loved the new machine because the new machine had given them a fight and a brotherhood first. Tyler preached to them, and his preaching is some of the most stirring talk in the film, which is exactly why it is so dangerous. He would gather the men and tell them what they were. He told them they were the middle children of history, with no great war to fight and no great hard times to survive, no clear purpose handed to them by the world. He told them they had all been raised on television to believe that one day they would be rich and famous, movie stars and rock stars and millionaires, and that slowly they were all learning this was a lie. And he told them that learning the lie had left them furious, deeply and quietly furious, a whole generation of men full of an anger they had never been allowed to feel. When Tyler said these things, the men felt seen. They felt understood down to the bone. Every word of it rang true, and that truth was the rope he used to pull them wherever he wanted them to go. This is the trap the film lays out so carefully. Tyler is not lying to these men about how they feel. He is right about the emptiness. He is right about the anger. He is right that they were sold. A dream that was never going to come true, and that the disappointment has hollowed them out. The narrator felt all of it. The audience feels all of it. The diagnosis is still correct, just as correct as it was in the bar on the night the man lost his apartment. But look at the medicine Tyler hands them for that real and honest pain. He does not help them build better lives. He does not point them toward anything that might actually fill the hole. He strips them of their names and their pride and their will, lines them up in matching black clothes, and turns them into an army that exists to break things. The right diagnosis led straight to a terrible cure. The narrator started to feel it before he could name it. This had been his thing, his and Tyler's, the secret they built together, and now it was sliding out of his hands. The house was full of strangers who looked at Tyler like he was something more than a man. Decisions were being made that the narrator knew nothing about. Tyler would vanish for stretches and come back having set new plans in motion. And when the narrator asked what was going on, he got the same answer the men on the porch had gotten. The first rule of Project Mayhem was that you do not ask questions. The narrator, who had helped invent this whole world, was now being told to shut up and trust, just like all the rest. He watched Gentle Bob become one of them too. Bob, the big soft man who had once held him while he cried. The man with the kind eyes from the cancer group, shaved his head and put on the black clothes, and became another nameless body in Tyler's army. Everywhere the narrator looked, the men he had felt closest to were disappearing into the crowd, melting into one obedient mass that moved and spoke as a single thing. The brotherhood that had once made each man feel more alive was now making every man feel exactly as the one beside him, and that sameness was the whole point. There were flashes of the old logic turning sour out in the world, too. The narrator used the hard new lessons Fight Club had taught him in ways that should have warned him about where all of this was heading. In one ugly moment, he threw himself around his boss's office and beat his own face bloody, then made it look like his boss had done it, using the threat of a lie to walk away from his job with a fat check in his pocket. It was clever. It was the fearlessness of Fight Club, aimed like a weapon. And it was also a man hurting himself and lying and threatening another person to get what he wanted, which is a long, dark way from a fair fight between two willing men in a basement. The tools that had once set these men free were quietly becoming tools to control and frighten and take. Step back and the shape of the whole turn becomes clear. Fight Club at its best had told these men to wake up, to feel their own lives, to never be afraid, to be fully themselves. Project Mayhem told them to shave their heads, lose their names, stop asking questions, and do as they were told. Fight Club gave a man back to himself. Project Mayhem took the man and fed him into a crowd. The promise had been freedom, and the result was a kind of slavery so complete that the slaves did not even want to be free, because their chains felt like belonging, and their master felt like the only person who had ever understood them. And here is the thing that makes it land so hard. Every one of those men joined for a real reason. They were genuinely lost. They were genuinely numb. The world really had failed to give them anything worth living for. And Tyler really had handed them a feeling of purpose when no one else would. Their hunger was true. Tyler simply took that true hunger and pointed it at exactly the wrong thing, the way a clever person can take a real, aching need and twist it into obedience. The men were not fools for following. They were starving, and he was the first person who fed them, and so they trusted him with everything, even after the food started to turn into poison. The narrator stood in the middle of the crowded house, surrounded by bald men in black who would die for Tyler, and barely glanced at him, and he felt a cold thread of fear begin to pull tight in his chest. He had wanted to feel alive, and he did. He had wanted a friend who understood the world, and he had one. But the friend was building something the narrator no longer recognized. With plans he was not allowed to know, using an army the narrator had helped to gather. The basement had been about feeling. This was about doing, and the narrator was beginning to suspect that whatever Tyler planned to do, it was going to be far bigger and far worse than a few broken windows. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Then Tyler did the one thing the narrator was least prepared for. He disappeared completely, leaving the army behind and the plans in motion, and the narrator was left alone in a country full of fight clubs he no longer controlled, chasing a ghost from city to city, trying to understand what his friend had set loose, and slowly stumbling toward a truth about Tyler that would tear his whole world in half. Section 5. The Friend Who Was Never There. The narrator went looking for Tyler, and what he found instead was the truth. Tyler had slipped away without a word, leaving behind a house full of bald men in black, and a plan the narrator was not allowed to know. So the narrator started flying from city to city, following the trail, trying to find his friend and figure out what he had set in motion. And in every city he landed in, he found something that did not make sense. There were fight clubs already, full-grown, in basements he had never visited. The thing he thought he and Tyler had built quietly in one town had somehow spread across the whole country, without him ever seeing it happen. That was strange enough. What happened next was stranger. The men in these far-off cities knew him. He would walk into a bar in a place he had never been, and the man behind the counter would go still and respectful, would look at him with a kind of awe, would treat him like someone important who had come to check on his work. They nodded at him like soldiers nodding at a general. Some of them spoke to him as if they had taken orders from him before, orders he had no memory of giving. The narrator kept telling them they had the wrong man, and they kept looking at him like he was testing them. To these strangers in these strange cities, he was not a lost man chasing a friend. He was the leader. He was Tyler Durden. The narrator could not hold the pieces together anymore, so he did the only thing left. He got a hotel room and he called Marla, the woman, who had drifted in and out of the edges of the story, the one person outside of all this who had known him from the start. He asked her a question that should have had an easy answer. He asked her what his name was, and Marla, confused and a little angry, told him the obvious thing. the thing she had always known. She told him his name was Tyler Durden. That was the moment the floor fell out of the world. Because then Tyler was there in the hotel room, calm and unhurried, and he finally told the narrator the truth he had been hiding the whole time. They were the same person. There had never been two men. Tyler Durden was not a soap salesman the narrator had met on a plane. Tyler Durden was something the narrator's own mind had built, a second self that lived inside him, a person he became without knowing it. When the narrator thought he was lying awake at night, unable to sleep, he had not been awake at all in the way he believed. He had been gone, slipped into being Tyler, walking and talking and acting in the world, while the part of him he thought of as himself was switched off. The sleeplessness from the very beginning of the story had never been simple sleeplessness. It had been the first crack, the first sign that his mind was splitting quietly down the middle. Tyler explained it the way you might explain something gentle to a frightened child, and the gentleness made it worse. He told the narrator that he had been desperate to change his life and could not do it on his own, so a part of him had stepped forward to do it for him. Tyler was every way the narrator wished he could be. Tyler looked the way the narrator wanted to look. Tyler was bold where the narrator was timid, sure where the narrator was lost, and free in every single way the narrator was trapped. The narrator had not made a friend on that airplane. He had met the part of himself he most wanted to become, and he had been so far gone, so hollow and so tired, that he could not even tell it was not a separate man. And once that truth landed, the whole story the narrator had been living rearranged itself in front of him, and every warm memory turned cold. The apartment that blew apart in the night, the fire that he had taken as a kind of accidental gift, setting him free from his stuff, had not been an accident at all. He had done it himself. The Tyler part of him had wired the place to blow and walked away, destroying his own careful little nest while the rest of him slept. The first fight in the parking lot, the one that woke him up, the one where Tyler asked to be hit, had been the narrator standing alone in the dark, swinging at nothing, beating himself bloody on the pavement. The two men trading punches that other people thought they saw had really been one broken man fighting his own body. Marla was the hardest piece of all. She had been calling him Tyler, because to her he had been Tyler, on the nights his mind handed the wheel to that other self. The narrator had spent the whole story confused about her, jealous of her closeness to Tyler, baffled by the way she looked at him. Now he understood. There had been no third person in that house at night. There had only ever been him sliding back and forth between the frightened man he thought he was and the fearless man he had invented, and Marla had been close to both without ever knowing they were the same. Sit with what this does to everything that came before, because this is the turn the whole essay has been building toward. For 4 sections, Tyler looked like a kind of dark teacher, a man who saw the world more clearly than anyone, who handed lost men a truth and a cure. The things he said about empty lives and soft anger and the cage of owning too much had rung true, and they rang true because they were true. But now the source of all that wisdom is laid bare, and the source is a man coming apart at the seams. The voice that diagnosed the sickness of the modern world so sharply was the voice of a mind that had snapped under the weight of that very sickness. The clear-eyed teacher was a symptom wearing the mask of a cure. This is the exact place where being right about everything and being right about nothing meet inside one person. The pain Tyler named was real, every bit of it. The narrator truly was numb. He truly was drowning in stuff. He truly had no purpose and no outlet, and no way to feel alive, and so did the men who followed him. None of that was made up. The hunger was true, but the man offering to feed that hunger did not exist. He was a story the narrator told himself, because the truth that he was a lonely and broken person who needed real help was too much to face. So instead of facing it, the narrator's mind built a hero, a strong, free man who would carry him through, and that invented hero led him and hundreds of others straight off a cliff. There is something almost unbearably sad underneath the shock of it. The narrator never actually escaped his empty life. He never found a wise friend who understood the world. He found loneliness so deep that it grew a second face just to keep him company. Everything he thought he had gained, the brotherhood, the purpose, the friend who finally got him, came from inside his own breaking mind. He had been talking to himself the entire time. He had been so alone that he invented the only person who ever seemed to understand him, and then he handed that invented person his whole life. And that invented person was not kind. This is the part that turns the sadness into dread. Tyler was not just the bold, free self the narrator wished he could be. Tyler was also reckless and cruel and hungry for destruction in a way the narrator was not. The mind had not built a gentle guide. It had built something that wanted to burn the world down, and it had given that something a charming smile and a sharp tongue, so the narrator and everyone else would follow it gladly. The narrator could see now that all the warmth he had felt, all the late-night talks, all the sense of finally belonging had been the bait. The hook was Project Mayhem. The hook was the army of bald men in black. The hook was whatever terrible thing Tyler had been quietly building in the back rooms while the narrator slept. Worst of all, the narrator could not simply walk away from Tyler, because Tyler was him. There was no friend to argue with, no leader to turn in to the police, no door to close. The enemy lived behind his own eyes and woke up whenever he fell asleep. He could not run from Tyler, because he would only be running with him. He could not hide from Tyler, because Tyler knew every thought the moment he thought it. He had spent the whole story chasing a ghost across the country, and the ghost had been riding in his own skin the entire trip. The freest man he had ever met and the thing that was destroying his life were the same person, and that person was himself. The narrator was left standing in that hotel room, with the truth crushing down on him. He had no friend. He had no separate enemy to defeat. He had only a sickness with a name and a face, a second self that had grown strong while he grew weak, and a country full of loyal men in black who answered to that self and not to him. The man who had once been too numb to feel a single thing now felt everything at once. Terror and grief and shame all crashing together, as he understood that he had been the author of his own ruin from the very first sleepless night. And once a person knows the truth, the film hands them something almost cruel. Watch the story a second time and the clues are everywhere, sitting in plain sight, scattered through the early scenes like little cracks in a wall that nobody notices until the whole wall comes down. The bold leader was on the screen long before the narrator ever met him on that plane. 4 separate times, in the quiet opening stretch of the film, his face flickers onto the screen for a single frame, there and gone so fast the eye can barely catch it. He appears for a heartbeat in the most ordinary moments, near the narrator at his work, hovering at the edge of a support meeting, a flash of the man who does not officially exist yet. The first time through, these flashes feel like nothing, a trick of the light, a glitch in the picture. The second time through, they are the story whispering its secret out loud from the very start. The bold leader was always there, tucked inside the narrator's life. waiting to be born, flickering at the corners of a man who could not sleep. The clues keep coming once you know to look. After the apartment burns, the narrator stands at a payphone trying to reach his new friend. He calls, gets no answer, hangs up, and a moment later, the phone rings back, and it is the bold leader calling him. But there is a small sign right there on the payphone, easy to miss, that says the phone does not accept calls coming in. The call that supposedly rings back cannot be real because that phone cannot receive a call at all. The film is quietly telling the truth in the background while the narrator believes a friend is reaching out to him. There is no friend. There is no incoming call. There is only a lonely man at a payphone, talking to a piece of himself. Look at every scene with the two of them in it, and a strange pattern rises up. No one else ever truly deals with them as two separate people. They are never properly introduced anywhere as a pair. Marla, the one person close to both of them, only ever speaks to one at a time, and she is forever baffled by how the man in front of her keeps changing, warm one minute and cold and strange the next, like two different people sharing the same face. She is baffled because he is two different people sharing the same face. The whole world only ever sees one man, because there only ever is one man, and the film never once breaks that rule. It hides the answer by simply showing the truth and trusting everyone to read it wrong. The first fight gives itself away too. Out in that parking lot, what looked like two friends trading punches was a single man alone in the dark, swinging at empty air and throwing himself down onto the pavement. Later, when the narrator beats himself bloody in his boss's office to win that fat payout, the film frames it so the truth shows through. One man hurling his own body around an empty room, while a frightened boss watches a person attack himself for no reason anyone could ever explain. The proof was always sitting right there inside the beating, and the bold leader the whole time knew everything the narrator knew. Every private thought, every buried memory, every small fear. He always seemed to understand the narrator perfectly, to finish his sentences, to know the exact thing to say to reach him. That flawless understanding looked like the magic of a once-in-a-lifetime friendship. It was something simpler and far sadder than that. A person cannot help knowing the inside of their own mind. The bold leader understood the narrator completely because the bold leader was the narrator, reading thoughts that had never once left the same skull. When the truth finally arrives, the film does the most unsettling thing it can do. It plays its own earlier scenes back, cut together again, with the bold leader lifted out of them. So the narrator and the audience watch. The moments they thought they understood quietly turn into something else. The man who seemed to stand beside him was never standing beside him. The story rewinds itself and reveals the empty space where a friend used to be, and the narrator has to watch his whole life get rewritten in front of his eyes. Every warm memory going hollow, every late-night talk revealed as a man muttering alone in an empty house. The wisdom, the comfort, the brotherhood, all of it had been coming from inside one breaking mind the entire time. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But understanding the truth was not the end of his trouble. It was the beginning of the worst part, because the Tyler half of him had not been wasting all those nights. There was a final plan already in motion, a plan so big it would reach far beyond one broken man or one secret club, and now the narrator knew that the only way to stop it was to find a way to stop himself. Section 6. The only way to stop him. The plan had a shape now, and the shape was monstrous, Project Mayhem had never been about broken windows and small mischief. That had only been practice, a way to test the men and harden them and pull them in deeper. The real plan, the one Tyler had been building in the back rooms while the narrator slept, was to set off bombs inside the headquarters of the big companies that held everyone's money records. Tyler believed that if you destroyed the buildings where all the debt was kept track of, the records of who owed what to whom, then everyone would go back to zero. No more owing. A clean slate for the whole country, bought with fire and falling concrete. He thought he could press a reset button on the entire money system by blowing it sky high. To the men in black, it sounded like freedom. It sounded like the boldest, most beautiful thing anyone had ever dared to do. They were going to free the world from its chains in one night of glorious destruction. But strip away the grand words and look at the plain fact underneath, because the film wants the plain fact to land. The plan was to fill buildings with explosives and bring them crashing down. The promise of setting men free had grown, step by step, into a plan for mass destruction, and the men cheering for it could no longer tell the difference between the two. Before the narrator fully understood the size of it, the cost of it arrived at his door in the worst possible way. Bob was dead. Gentle Bob, the big man with the kind eyes who had once held the narrator while he wept, had gone out on a Project Mayhem job and been shot in the head by the police. The men carried his body back to the house, and the way they treated him broke something open in the narrator. To them, Bob was not a person anymore. He was a problem. He was a body that had to be hidden before it brought the police down on all of them. They talked about getting rid of the evidence. They stood over their dead brother and called him evidence, like he was a stain to be cleaned up, and they moved to bury him in the yard with no name and no grief, just one more task on Tyler's list. The narrator could not stand it. He pushed through them, furious, and told them the truth that the whole machine had trained them to forget. This was not evidence. This was a man. This man had a name. His name was Robert Paulson. He said it again and again, fighting to make them hear it, fighting to make them remember that the thing lying dead on the floor had been a living person with a life and a name of his own. And here, the story drives its cruelest point all the way home. Back when these men joined Project Mayhem, they had given up their names on purpose, shaved their heads, and dropped their old selves to become nameless parts of something bigger. Now, standing over Bob's body, they finally started saying a name out loud, a real name, Robert Paulson. His name is Robert Paulson, picking up the words and repeating them together. But even this, even a man's death, even the simple act of remembering who he was, the machine swallowed and turned into another chant for the cause. The men did not mourn Bob as a person. They turned his name into a slogan, a rallying cry, a thing to shout while they marched toward the next act of destruction. In death, Bob got his name back for one moment, and then the movement took even that and made it fuel. That was the moment the narrator fully turned. The numbness he had carried at the start of the story was long gone, burned away by the fights, and now in its place was a clear and terrible understanding. The thing he had helped build was killing people. It had eaten his friend and spat out a chant, and it was about to do something far larger and far worse. He had wanted to feel alive, and the path he had taken to get there had led to a dead man on the floor and a plan to bring buildings down on a city. He decided, with everything left in him, that he was going to stop it. But stopping it meant fighting the hardest enemy a person can face, because the enemy was the strongest, boldest part of himself. He raced to undo the plan he had set in motion, He went to the police to confess, to warn them, to beg them to act, and found that the police themselves were Project Mayhem now. Men in uniform who answered to Tyler and saw the narrator's sudden change of heart as a betrayal to be punished. There was no safe authority left to run to. Tyler had thought of everything because Tyler was a part of the narrator's own clever mind and had been planning this while the narrator was not even awake to watch. Everywhere the narrator turned for help, he found another bald head and another loyal stare. So he tried to do it himself. He went down into the parking area beneath one of the marked buildings to find the explosives and pull them apart with his own hands, sweating and shaking, trying to remember everything the Tyler part of him knew about how the bombs were built. And that was when Tyler came for him in person, calm and amused, to stop him from stopping the plan. They fought. To anyone who could have seen it, the way the world saw everything in this story, it looked like two men throwing each other down concrete stairs and through railings. But there were not two men. There was one man, alone, being hurled around an empty garage by the part of himself that wanted the world to burn. The narrator was losing, badly, because Tyler was everything in him that was fearless and cruel. And the frightened part of him had never once won a fight against that. Tyler dragged him up to the top floor of a building, high above the city, to make him watch the grand finale, the moment all the rigged towers would come down together. And there, beaten and bleeding, holding a gun that Tyler had put in play, the narrator finally understood the one thing that could save him. The gun was not really in Tyler's hand. The whole fight, the whole chase, the whole story had been happening inside one body, and that body belonged to the narrator. Tyler only had as much power as the narrator handed him. Tyler could not be outfought, because fighting harder just meant defeating the strong, free, reckless self even more. The narrator could not beat Tyler by becoming more like Tyler. He could only beat him by doing the one thing the bold and self-loving Tyler would never do. The one move Tyler could not see coming because it made no sense to a creature built to survive and dominate. The narrator put the gun to his own face and pulled the trigger. He did not aim it at Tyler because there was no Tyler to aim at. He aimed it at himself, choosing to do harm to the body they shared, taking the one bit of control that was truly his. The bullet tore through his cheek and out the side, and it did not kill him, but it did something stranger and more important. Tyler, the invented man, the second self, fell to the floor with a hole in the back of his head and did not get up. By turning the weapon on himself, by being willing to do the thing his fearless self never would, the narrator finally took back the wheel of his own mind. The free man who had seemed to have all the answers, the friend who was never real, the teacher who led hundreds of lost men toward fire, was gone. The narrator had survived him. The narrator had survived himself. This is where the two halves of the whole story finally lock together, and it is worth saying plainly. The narrator did not save himself by finding a better philosophy or a wiser leader. He saved himself by taking responsibility for his own broken mind. The cure for Tyler was never more Tyler. It was never another grand idea or another bold plan. It was a single, painful, ordinary act of a man refusing to let the most destructive part of himself drive any longer. After a whole story spent chasing freedom through fights and bombs and a worshipped leader, the actual freedom turned out to be quiet and small and hard. The freedom of a person choosing to own what was wrong inside them, instead of handing it to someone else to carry. And then came the ending the world would argue about for decades. The narrator's men, still loyal, brought Marla to him at the top of that building. frightened and confused, not understanding any of what had happened. He sent the men away. He took her bleeding hand in his, the one real human connection he had left, the woman who had known him through all of it. And as the two of them stood at the window, the bombs went off below. One after another, the great towers full of debt records buckled and fell, collapsing into clouds of dust against the night sky, while a quiet song drifted over the wreck of it all. Tyler had lost the man, but Tyler's last plan had still gone through. The buildings came down anyway. The narrator could only stand there, broken and bleeding and finally free of the thing inside him, and watch the destruction he had set loose finish itself in front of his eyes. That is where the story leaves him, holding the hand of the only person who ever really knew him, watching a city's worth of debt turn to dust. It is an ending with no clean victory in it. The monster inside him is dead, but the monster's work is done. He is free and the world is on fire. The man who could not feel anything at the start now feels the full weight of everything he has caused, with no way left to take any of it back. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The story of the narrator and Tyler ends right there, on that high floor, in the dust and the dark. But the story of what this film would mean, out in the real world, in the minds of the millions of people who watched it, was only just getting started. And what happened next is one of the strangest things ever to happen to a movie, because a huge number of the people who watched this exact ending, this warning written in fire, walked out of it having fallen completely in love with the very man it was built to warn them about. Section 7. The warning everyone loved. The story ended with a man watching the world burn. The audience walked out and decided he was the hero. That is, the strange twist that happened off the screen. In the real world, after the lights came up, and it is maybe the most important thing about this whole film. The movie was built from the ground up as a warning. Every part of the story, from the sleepless man to the dead friend to the burning towers, was meant to show where a certain kind of anger leads if you follow it all the way down. And a huge number of the people who watched it took one look at the man giving that warning and fell completely in love with him. It did not look, at first, like the film would have any kind of life at all. When it came out, it landed with a thud. It played for an early crowd of important film people who sat through it, stunned and unhappy, and some of them got up and walked out before it was over. Then it opened to the public, and barely anyone came. It made about $37 million at home, which sounds like a lot until you learn the studio had spent more than $60 million just to make it, before counting all the money spent telling people it existed. By the cold math of the movie business, the same kind of cold math the narrator did at his old job, it was a failure, a flop, a movie that lost its makers a pile of money. The reviews did not help. Plenty of critics hated it. Some of them looked at all the fighting and the blood and decided the film was nothing more than violence for the sake of violence, a loud and ugly thing dressed up to look deep. They missed the joke buried inside it, the way the whole story was quietly making fun of the very thing it showed. One of the actors said later that the people whose job was to sell the movie did not even seem to want to, that the film was a hard one to boil down to a simple poster, and that some of the sellers seemed to feel personally attacked by it, as if the story was pointing a finger straight at them. So they buried it and it sank, and that looked like the end. Then something happened that almost nobody saw coming. The movie came out on disc for people to watch at home. And at home, away from the pressure of a crowded theater, people finally started to get it. Word spread. Friends pressed it on friends. The discs sold and sold and sold, around 13 million of them, more than almost anything else of its kind, and the dead flop clawed its way back to life as one of the most loved films of its time. Quotes from it ended up everywhere. The face of the man from the story, the bold free one, started showing up on posters taped to the walls of college dorm rooms all across the country. A movie that the world had shrugged off became a movie that a whole generation could recite from memory. But as it grew sideways, into a shape its makers never meant for it to take. The man who became the icon, the face on all those dorm walls, was the second self, the invented one, the charming and fearless leader who talked about tearing the world down. To a lot of young men, especially ones who felt lost and angry and left behind, he did not look like a warning at all. He looked like the answer. He looked the only person in the whole world who understood them, the same way he had once looked to the narrator. They did not see a sick mind giving voice to its own breakdown. They saw a hero who said out loud all the furious things they felt, a man who refused to bow to a world that had let them down, a man who took his rage and turned it into power. So the worship grew. Groups of unhappy young men online, including ones who blamed the world and everyone in it for their own loneliness, and harder groups with darker ideas about how society should be torn apart and rebuilt, all began holding the film up like a kind of holy book. They traded its lines. They borrowed its anger. They built whole ways of thinking around the man the story had been trying to warn them about. The movie that flopped, the movie that got booed and buried, slowly became one of the favorite stories of exactly the kind of lost, raging men it had put on screen as a tragedy. The people who made the film have watched all of this happen, and they have not been quiet about it. The director has said, again and again, and in the plainest words he can find, that the whole thing was meant as a joke at the world's expense, a sharp and dark joke, and that taking the bold leader as a role model means missing the point entirely. He once compared it to another famous film, saying that his movie was about as serious in cheering for blowing up buildings as that other film was about cheering for a young man to chase his girlfriend's mother. In other words, the destruction was the punchline, not the lesson. It was the thing you were supposed to recoil from, not reach for. When people asked him how he felt about his story being adopted by angry men who saw the leader as a hero, the director gave an answer that was both honest and a little weary. He said he was not responsible for how people choose to read things, that the meaning of stories and symbols drifts over time no matter what their makers intended. He admitted his film had become one of many touchstones for those groups, one of the handful of stories they pointed to over and over. But then he said the part that cuts the deepest. He said his team did not make the film for those people, and he said that it felt impossible to him that anyone could watch the story and not understand that the bold leader is a bad influence, a warning sign, a person to be feared rather than copied. For the people who still cannot see that after watching the whole thing, he said simply that he did not know how to reach them and did not know how to help them. The writer who first dreamed up the story has said his own version of the same thing. He has pointed out, with a kind of dark amusement, that the angry men who cling to his story do so partly because they have so few stories to cling to in the first place. They reach for the same tiny handful of films over and over, he said, because that small shelf is nearly all they have. There is the one about a man learning the world he lives in is a lie, and there is his own, and not much else that speaks to the way they feel. So they grip what little they have far too tightly. and read it however they need to read it. He has noted how odd it is that the lonely and the left behind have taken up the language of his bold leader, when the whole point of that leader was that he was a symptom of being lonely and left behind, not a cure for it. And the writer has been about what he actually meant when he sat down to make the thing. He has said he was curious. What would happen if men had the kind of story women already had, the gentle kind, where people gather in a circle and share their pain and lean on each other, except with fists instead of feelings, with fighting instead of book clubs. He wanted to look at men who had no place to put what was inside them. The whole idea began with a question about loneliness and connection, about men who could not reach each other. And somewhere along the way, that quiet question grew into a story about basements and bombs. The anger was always meant to be the problem the story was examining, never the solution it was selling. So here is the deep and twisting irony that sits at the center of all of this, and it is the exact heart of what this entire film essay has been building toward. The men who worship the bold leader, who tape his face to their walls and trade his lines and take him as a hero, are proving the film completely right and completely wrong at the very same time, in the very same act. They prove the film right about everything because they exist at all. The story said there was a whole generation of men out there who felt empty and angry and lost, men with no clear purpose, men who had been promised a meaningful life and handed a hollow one, men so hungry for something to believe in that they would follow almost anyone who seemed to understand them. That was the diagnosis. That was the sickness the story pointed at. And the proof that the diagnosis was dead accurate is that millions of those exact men showed up, recognized themselves in the story, and reached for the leader with both hands. The film said you are out there, lost and furious, and looking for a savior, and the world answered, here we are. The hunger the story described turned out to be one of the truest things anyone had ever put on a screen. And in the same breath, those very same men prove the film right about nothing because of what they reached for. The leader was never a savior. He was a warning. He was a mind coming apart, a man who led a crowd of lost souls toward a dead friend and a pile of rubble. Following him in the story led to ruin. Following him in real life, taking his rage as a roadmap, leads to the same place it always led, which is nowhere good, a deeper loneliness dressed up as strength. The men who took him as a hero swallowed the diagnosis and then drank the poison the story had clearly marked as poison. They felt the ache the film described, and then they chose the exact cure. The film spent 3 hours showing them would destroy them. That is the whole title of this story, acted out not by characters but by the audience itself. Right about everything, because the lost and angry men are real, and the film saw them clearly. Right about nothing, because the answer those men reached for was never an answer, only a symptom wearing a hero's face. The reason the mistake is so easy to make is worth sitting with. Because it is not as simple as people being foolish. The bold leader is genuinely magnetic. He is played by one of the most charming, good-looking, watchable people alive, given the best lines in the film and the coolest clothes and the most confident walk. Everything about how he is filmed makes him a pleasure to watch. And the things he says about empty modern life are not stupid things. They are sharp and true, and they land hard. Which is the trap. The diagnosis is so accurate and so satisfying that many people stop listening right there, in the middle, before the story turns and shows them the cost. They hear a man name their pain perfectly, and their hearts open, and they follow him through the open door. and they never quite notice that the door leads off a cliff. They wanted a hero so badly that they were willing to make one out of a story written to warn them against exactly that wish. The narrator inside the film made the same mistake first. He was the original fan. He met a bold, free man who named his pain and offered him a feeling of being alive. And he handed that man his whole life without asking where it would lead. The audience that worships the leader is simply doing what the narrator did, except they are doing it from their seats, with no twist coming to wake them up. No gun, no moment where the truth crashes down. They get to stay inside the dream the narrator finally escaped. They get to keep the hero the narrator had to kill. And so a film that lost money, got booed, and was nearly forgotten became one of the most quoted, most loved, most deeply misread stories of its whole era. A warning that millions chose to hear as a promise. The makers built a careful trap meant to catch a certain kind of anger and hold it up to the light, and a certain kind of anger walked straight into the trap, looked around, and decided it had found a home. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The fans, though, were not the last people who would try to bend this story into a shape that suited them better. Years after the film came out, on the other side of the world, an entire country would take the ending itself, the burning towers, the final image, and quietly rewrite it so that the warning came out sounding like something else completely. Section 8. The Country That Changed the Ending. A film about a man who could not stop himself ended up in the hands of people who wanted to stop the whole story. It happened in early 2022, more than 20 years after the movie first came out, far away in China. The country's biggest streaming service put the film up for people to watch, and fans there sat down to see the famous ending they had heard about for years. The towers coming down, the dust, the two figures holding hands at the window. What they got instead was a black screen and a few lines of plain text. The ending had been cut out and rewritten. Where the buildings were supposed to fall, the screen simply went dark, and a written message appeared to explain what happened next. It said that the police had quickly figured out the entire plan and arrested everyone involved, and that they had stopped the bomb from ever going off. It went on to say that after a trial, the bold leader had been sent away to a hospital for the mentally ill, where he would get treatment. The fire, the falling towers, the whole shattering finale. All of it was gone, replaced by a few cold sentences promising that the law had won and order had been kept. So the story now ended the exact opposite way it was built to end. The original film leaves you standing in the wreckage, the plan carried out, the world on fire, no clean victory anywhere in sight. The new version handed the audience a tidy little bow. The bad men lost. The police were smart and fast. The dangerous one was locked safely away. Everything turned out fine. A story made to leave you uneasy was turned into a story made to make you feel that the people in charge had everything under control. There was a reason for the change, even if the change itself was clumsy. China has some of the strictest rules in the world about what movies and shows are allowed to put on screen, and one of the things those rules tend to demand is that criminals must be punished and order must be restored before the credits roll. A story where the troublemakers win, where the buildings fall and nobody pays for it, runs straight against that demand. So somewhere along the way, the dangerous ending got swapped for a safe one, so the story would obey the rule that says the law always wins in the end. What stayed murky was exactly who made the call. It was never fully clear whether the streaming company decided on its own to play it safe, or whether the government ordered the change, or whether the people who now owned the film had a hand in it too, since the studio that made it had been bought up by a giant entertainment company a few years earlier. The fingerprints were smudged. All anyone knew for certain was that one day the ending was the ending, and the next day it had been quietly traded for a lie with a happy face. People noticed fast, and people were furious. The change was spotted in late January, and within days it had become news all over the world. Inside China, film lovers who had already seen the real version, often through copies passed quietly from person to person, mocked the new ending without mercy. They knew what the story was supposed to be, and they knew they had been handed a fake. One viewer called the swap too outrageous to take seriously. The anger spread across the country's social media until the streaming company found itself standing in the middle of a storm it clearly had not wanted. Outside China, a major group that watches over human rights described the rewrite as something out of a dark and controlling future world, the kind of place where the powerful simply edit reality until it says what they want it to say. And then came the response from the man who first wrote the story, which carried a strange and delicious twist inside it. He reacted with heavy sarcasm, marveling out loud that in this fresh new version, everyone got a happy ending, that justice always won, and that apparently, to his great surprise, nothing had ever exploded at all. But underneath the joke, he pointed out something that almost nobody else had noticed. The censored ending, the one meant to defang his story, actually landed very close to the ending of his original book. This is a piece of the puzzle worth slowing down for, because it is so perfectly odd. The movie most people know ends with the towers all falling, but the book the movie came from ends differently. In the book, the grand plan does not really succeed the way it does in the film, and the narrator ends up locked away in a mental hospital, his mind still broken, the bold leader still lurking somewhere inside him. So when the censors in China rewrote the film's ending to say that the plan was stopped and the leader was sent off to a hospital for the mentally ill, they had, without meaning to, dragged the movie back toward the book it grew out of. The writer himself said as much, noting with some amusement that the people changing his story had accidentally steered it closer to where he had originally put it. There is an even deeper joke hiding in that. The censored ending, the one designed to neuter the film and make it obey the rules, accidentally told the truth about the story out loud. Remember what the whole film turns on. The bold leader is not a real separate man. He is a sickness, a second self growing inside a broken mind. The kind of thing that, in the real world, would in fact call for a hospital and treatment, not for posters on a dorm wall. By writing that the leader was carted off to a place for the mentally ill, the censors stumbled onto the actual point of the movie better than millions of adoring fans ever had. They were trying to bury the message, and, instead, they blurted it out. The dangerous man belongs in treatment, because the dangerous man is a mind that has come apart. The fans who worshipped him missed that completely. The censors, of all people, said it in plain text on a black screen. The story did not stay rewritten for long. The outcry was loud enough and steady enough that within about 2 weeks, the streaming company gave in and quietly put the real ending back. They restored almost all of the cut footage, 11 of the roughly 12 minutes that had been chopped out, leaving only a little still missing for other reasons. The towers fell again. The lie with the happy face was gone, and the uneasy ending the film was built around returned to where it belonged. The people who tried to change what the story meant had been forced to change it back. Step back and look at the whole episode, because it is a near-perfect example of the very thing the film was warning about, playing out in real life decades after anyone made it. The story is, at its heart, about systems of control. It is about a world that wants everyone calm and obedient and tucked safely into their little nests, buying what they are told to buy and never causing trouble. It is about how the powerful keep order, smooth over the cracks, and make sure nobody steps too far out of line. And here, all these years later, a powerful system looked at that very story, got nervous about what it said, and tried to smooth it over, tidy it up, and rewrite reality until the troublemakers lost and order was restored. A film about people being controlled got controlled. A story about the powerful editing the truth got its truth edited by the powerful. That is the diagnosis proving itself right one more time, in the loudest way imaginable. The film said that systems of control will always try to flatten anything that threatens them, will always prefer a comforting lie to an uncomfortable truth, will always reach for the eraser when a story refuses to behave. And then a system of control reached for the eraser in full view of the whole world and did exactly that. Nobody could have staged a better demonstration of the movie's point than the censors managed to stage by accident while trying to destroy it. And the other half of the story shows up here too. The part about the bold leader being right about nothing. His big solution, blowing up the towers to free everyone from their debt, was so dangerous, so clearly a recipe for chaos and ruin, that a government felt it had to be wiped off the screen entirely. Not softened, not argued with, erased. That is how poisonous his answer really is. It cannot even be shown winning without setting off alarms. Because a story where that kind of destruction succeeds is a story the powerful cannot allow to exist. The fans took his rage as a roadmap. A whole country looked at where that roadmap led and decided people should not be allowed to see the destination. Both reactions, the worship and the erasing, point at the same truth from opposite sides. The diagnosis is real enough to frighten the powerful. And the cure is dangerous enough that the powerful would rather pretend it never happened. The strangest part of all is that erasing the ending did not make any of it less true. You can cut the towers from the screen, but you cannot cut the debt out of people's lives, or the emptiness out of the men who feel it, or the anger out of a generation that was promised more than it got. The censors could change what the movie showed. They could not change the world the movie was describing. The story kept being true outside the screen, no matter what the screen was forced to say, which is maybe the final proof of how sharp its aim really was. A lie pasted over the ending changed nothing about the sickness the story had spotted. It only proved how badly someone wanted that sickness kept quiet. So between the fans who loved the wrong man and the country that tried to rewrite the wrong ending, the film spent decades being pulled in every direction by people who wanted it to mean something other than what it meant. Some wanted the leader to be a hero. Some wanted the law to win. Almost nobody wanted to sit with the story exactly as it was, uneasy and unresolved, a warning with no comfort at the end of it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Which leaves the hardest question of all, the one underneath every fight over what the ending should say. Strip away the worship and the censorship and the arguing, and you are left staring at something genuinely unsettling. A story written at the close of the last century somehow described the world of today with an accuracy that feels almost impossible. The empty buying, the crushing debt, the lonely and furious young men, the screens that promise everyone a dream they will never reach. None of it faded after the film came out. All of it grew. And the question of how a movie about a man fighting himself in a basement managed to see so far ahead is the thing worth turning to next. Section 9. Everything he got right. The hardest thing to admit about this story is how much of it came true. It would be easy to wave the whole film away as the angry daydream of a man falling apart, a fever from the end of the last century, with nothing to say to the world we actually live in now. But that is the trap, and it is a trap the story sets on purpose. Because when you go back and listen closely to what the bold leader actually said about the way people live, and then you look up from the screen at the world outside your window, the match is so close it makes your skin crawl. A story about a man punching himself in a basement somehow described the years ahead, with a clearness that almost no one who made it could have planned. That accuracy is the whole reason any of this matters, and it is the engine underneath the worship and the fear and the fights over the ending. Start with the thing the story noticed first, back when the narrator could not sleep. He was a man drowning in stuff. He built his whole sense of himself out of the things he bought, the lamp and the table and the clever plates, telling himself each new purchase would finally make him complete. The story looked at that and said something simple and brutal, that the things you own end up owning you. You think you are buying comfort and freedom, and what you are really buying is a list of objects to clean and protect and worry about and replace, a leash you tie around your own neck one purchase at a time. That was already true when the film came out. It is far more true now. The buying never stopped. It moved out of the catalogs and onto the screens everyone carries in their pockets, so that now a person can fill the hole inside them at any hour of any day, with a tap of a thumb, faster and easier than the narrator ever could. The hunger the story pointed at did not shrink in the years since. It grew teeth and learned to follow people everywhere they go. The story also looked hard at the work people do to pay for all that stuff, and it did not flinch. The bold leader stood in front of his men and called them slaves with white collars, a whole army of people pumping gas and waiting tables and pushing paper, spending the best hours of their lives on jobs they could not stand. He said, advertising had everyone chasing cars and clothes, working jobs they hated so they could buy things they did not need. Listen to how ordinary that sounds now. How many people would nod along without a second thought? The idea that millions of people pour their days into work that feels empty, only to spend the money on things that do not fill them, only to need more work to buy more things, is not some wild claim anymore. It is just a description of a lot of people's lives. The story named the wheel and showed people they were running on it, and the wheel is still turning, faster than ever. Then comes the speech that lands hardest of all, the one where the bold leader tells his men exactly who they are. He calls them the middle children of history. He says they have no great war to fight and no great hard times to survive, no clear enemy and no shared struggle to give their lives a shape. He says they were raised by television to believe that one day they would all be rich and famous, that they would grow up to be movie stars and rock stars and millionaires, and that slowly, painfully, they are learning that none of it is going to happen. And he says that this discovery has left them furious, a whole generation of people quietly boiling with an anger they cannot even name because they were promised a grand and special life and handed an ordinary, disappointing one instead. Sit with how closely that describes the years that followed. A generation did grow up on screens that promised everyone could be special, that anyone could be famous, that the dream was always one lucky breakaway. And a generation did slowly learn that the promise was mostly a lie, that most people would not be rich or famous or special, that the grand life on the screen was not coming for them. And that generation did get angry, openly and loudly, in ways the whole world can now see. The bold leader described the mood of millions of young people decades before they felt it in full. He looked at a crowd of comfortable, restless, disappointed men and told them their disappointment would curdle into rage, and then the world went and proved him right on a scale he never could have imagined. The story did not just spot a sickness in a few men in a basement. It spotted a sickness that would spread to fill the world. The film also went straight at the way people decide who they are, and it landed a blow that still stings. The bold leader tells the narrator, and tells the men, that they are not their jobs. They are not how much money sits in their bank. They are not the car they drive or the things stuffed in their wallets. He is trying to pry these men loose from the idea that a person's worth can be measured in dollars and possessions. The idea that you are the sum of what you own and what you earn. And that idea, the one he is fighting, has only dug its claws in deeper since. People now carry their whole sense of standing around with them, measured in numbers, in what they have and what they make, and how they appear to others, more constantly and more publicly than ever before. The story saw a world where human worth was being turned into a price tag, and it begged people to refuse that math, and the world mostly did the opposite. And underneath all of it, holding the whole plan together at the end, was debt. It is easy to forget, in all the talk of fists and fire, that the bold leader's grand scheme was about debt above everything else. The plan was to destroy the records of what everyone owed, to wipe the slate clean, because he believed people were buried alive under their debts, chained to the companies they owed, working their empty jobs in part just to keep paying it all back. The story put debt at the very center of its picture of modern life, as the quiet chain that keeps everyone in line, the reason people cannot simply walk away from the wheel, even when they hate it. That picture has not aged a day. If anything, the chain has grown heavier. The idea that vast numbers of people are weighed down by what they owe, that the debt shapes their choices and traps them in lives they would otherwise leave, is not a strange notion anymore. It is one of the defining facts of the age the film was quietly predicting. The story even saw the loneliness coming. Right at the start, the narrator described the people he met on planes as single-serving friends, little disposable connections that lasted exactly one trip and then vanished. Like the tiny tub of butter and the small packet of sugar, he described his own life as a copy of a copy of a copy, each version of him fainter and more worn than the last. A sense of being one identical unit among millions, mass-produced and interchangeable. He was describing a world where human contact had become thin and temporary and shallow, where people brushed past each other endlessly without ever truly touching, where everyone felt like a faded duplicate of everyone else. And that, too, is a feeling people talk about constantly now, the strange loneliness of being more connected than ever, and more alone than ever at the same time, surrounded by faces and starving for a single real one. The story felt that coming when most people still thought the future would bring everyone closer together. Pull all of these together, and the picture is almost frightening. Empty buying that never satisfies. Work that hollows people out. A generation promised greatness and handed disappointment, slowly turning that disappointment into rage, worth measured in money and possessions. Debt as a chain around everyone's neck, connection turned thin and disposable. Lonely, restless people surrounded by screens. The bold leader named every one of these things, decades before they grew into the defining troubles of the world. And he named them with a sharpness that most careful thinkers of his time never managed. The diagnosis was not a little bit right. It was right almost all the way down. This is the part of the story that the worshippers cling to, and it is the part the censors could not erase because it lives outside the screen entirely. You cannot cut the empty buying out of people's lives with an editing tool. You cannot paste a happy ending over the debt, or the loneliness, or the disappointed rage. The story spotted real things, true things, things that were there before the film, and would only grow after it. And that truth is the source of all its strange power. People feel it the moment they watch. They recognize their own lives in it. They feel seen in a way that few stories ever manage to make them feel. The hunger the bold leader describes is their hunger. The trap he describes is their trap. The disappointment he describes is sitting in their own chest. When he speaks, something deep inside the viewer says, yes, that is exactly it. That is exactly how it feels. And that right there is the most dangerous thing in the entire film. Because here is the cruel logic the story is quietly ting. The thing that ties everything in this essay together. The more right a person is about the disease, the more you will trust them about the cure. A stranger who perfectly describes the pain you have carried your whole life, who names it better than you ever could, who makes you feel understood for the first time, has earned something enormous from you. They have earned your trust, your belief, your willingness to follow. And once they have that, you will swallow whatever they hand you next, because surely a person who saw the problem that clearly must also know the answer. The accuracy of the diagnosis becomes the key that unlocks the door, and the cure walks right in behind it without ever being checked. That is exactly how the bold leader works, on the narrator and on the men and on the audience. He earns total trust by being undeniably right about the emptiness of modern life. And then he uses that trust to lead everyone toward fists and bombs and ruin. The truer his read on the sickness, the more convincing his poison becomes. If he had been wrong about the world, nobody would have followed him anywhere. It is precisely because he is right, so deeply and obviously right, that his terrible answer feels trustworthy. The film makes his diagnosis undeniable on purpose, so that you feel the pull in your own body, so that you understand from the inside how a lost person could follow a voice like that, straight off a cliff. The story is not testing whether the diagnosis is correct. It is showing you that being correct about the problem proves nothing at all about the solution, and that the most dangerous guide in the world is the one who has just earned all of your trust by telling you the truth. This is the exact place where the two halves of the whole story meet again in their sharpest form. Right about everything, because the picture of modern life is almost flawless, truer now than the day it was painted. And right about nothing, because that flawless picture is being used to sell an answer that destroys everyone who buys it. The accuracy is not the case for the leader. The accuracy is the bait. The diagnosis is real so that you will trust the cure, and the cure will ruin you. And the realness of the diagnosis is the very reason you never see the ruin coming. The men who worship him took the bait. They heard the diagnosis, felt the jolt of being understood, and followed the voice straight into the trap never noticing that being understood and being helped are two completely different things. The narrator took the bait first before any of them. He met a man who named his pain perfectly and handed his whole life over in gratitude. The accuracy seduced him exactly as it has seduced millions of viewers since, and the seduction is the same every time, in the basement, and in the audience, and in the lonely young men with the posters on their walls. The truth opens the door. The poison comes through it. So the story leaves us with a problem that feels almost unsolvable. The sickness it describes is real. The hunger is real. The disappointment and the loneliness and the debt and the rage are all real and growing, and the bold leader was right about every bit of it. If the answer is not him, if the answer is not the fists and the fire and the worshipped leader, then what is left? A person can agree completely with the diagnosis and still be horrified by the cure, and then they are stuck holding a true problem with no good solution, which is the most dangerous place a person can stand, because it is exactly the place where they start looking for a savior. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The strange thing is that the film did offer an answer. It was there the whole time, quiet and unglamorous, standing off to the side while everyone stared at the fists and the fire. It had nothing to do with bombs or basements or shaved heads, and the man at the very center of the story walked past it again and again, too busy chasing the bold, loud cure to notice the small, real one, a person who had been trying to reach him from the very beginning. Section 10. The answer he walked past. Her name was Marla, and she was the answer the whole time. While the narrator chased the loud cure, the fists and the brotherhood, and the bold, free man who seemed to have all the answers, there was a quiet one standing off to the side, waiting, mostly ignored. She showed up early, before the bold leader ever did, back when the narrator was still sneaking into support groups for diseases he did not have, weeping on strangers so he could sleep, and she was doing the exact same thing he was. She was a faker too, a tourist in other people's pain, sitting in those circles of dying people, pretending, borrowing grief she had no right to, soaking up the feeling and slipping away clean. The first time he saw her, he knew her instantly because she was him. That is exactly why he hated her on sight. As long as the narrator could believe his own lie, that he belonged in those rooms, that his tears were real, the support groups worked. They gave him the feeling and the sleep he was starving for. But the moment Marla walked in, another obvious faker doing the same shameful thing, his lie collapsed. He could not cry anymore. He could not sleep anymore. Her presence held a mirror up to him and forced him to see what he actually was, a liar feeding on the suffering of the genuinely sick. She broke his fake cure simply by being another version of it, and he could not forgive her for showing him the truth about himself. They argued. They divided up the groups between them. He took some nights, and she took others, and he tried to pretend she did not exist. But look at what she really was, underneath his hatred, because this is the part the story is quietly pointing at the entire time. Marla was a real person, a genuinely lost, genuinely struggling, genuinely lonely human being, the only one in the whole story who matched the narrator exactly. They were two of a kind, both empty, both faking their way through other people's funerals to feel something, both drifting through life with a hole inside them that nothing seemed to fill. The difference between them, the thing that mattered, was that Marla was honest about being a mess. She did not pretend to be a hero. She did not build a second self to carry her. She did not dream up a grand plan to fix the world. She was just a flawed, reckless, honest person, openly broken, careless, even about whether she lived or died, making no effort to look like anything other than what she was. And that honesty is the thing the narrator most needed and most feared. Here was a person exactly as lost as he was, who could have been the one real connection in his entire empty life. Two lonely fakers who recognized each other across a crowded room. If the narrator had simply turned toward her, if he had been honest with her the way she was honest with the world, if he had let himself say, "I am a mess too, I am lonely too, I do not know how to live either," he might have found the only thing that could ever actually fill the hole. Another real human being, seen clearly and held on to honestly. The story put his match right in front of him in the very first stretch of the film, and gave him every chance to reach for her. He did the opposite. He turned away from the real person, and soon after invented a fake one. Faced with a flesh and blood human who was just as broken as he was, and offered the chance at something true, the narrator backed off, and not long after, his fracturing mind built the bold leader instead. Think about what that choice really means. Given the option of a difficult, awkward, honest connection with an equal, or a thrilling, flattering fantasies of a strong, free man who would tell him what to do, he chose the fantasy. He chose the hero he made up over the person who was actually there. He chose the loud lie over the quiet truth. And that single choice is the choice the whole film is about. The choice the worshipping fans made. The choice lost people make over and over in the real world. The real cure is hard and plain, and asks something of you. The fake cure is exciting and easy, and asks only that you follow. The story makes this even sharper with the way the bold leader treats Marla. The invented self did not want the narrator anywhere near her. Through the part of him that was the bold leader, the narrator did end up tangled with Marla, close to her, in a way the rest of him could barely understand or accept, watching it happen with confusion and disgust, as if another man were doing it. And the bold leader was fiercely protective of keeping the two halves apart. He warned the narrator never to talk about him to her, worked to keep her at arm's length from the truth, treated her as something that had to be managed and contained. There is a reason for that, and it is the key to the whole thing. The fake cure has to block the real one to survive. The bold leader is a fantasy the narrator built because he was too lonely and too afraid to reach for a real person. But if the narrator ever actually connected with Marla, truly and honestly, then he would not need the fantasy anymore. A real bond with a real human would make the invented hero pointless. So the invented hero fought to keep them apart, because real connection was the one thing that could destroy him. The false self guarded the narrator's loneliness on purpose, because his loneliness was the soil the false self grew in. The moment the narrator found something real, the fantasy would wither, so the fantasy made sure he never quite found it. This is the cruelest and most honest thing in the whole story. The destructive part of the narrator was not just leading him toward bombs and ruin. It was actively keeping him from the cure, standing between him and the one person who could have healed him, because the cure was the threat. Every lonely person who has ever invented a comforting story to avoid the harder work of reaching out to a real human being knows this pattern in their bones. The fantasy is easier. The fantasy does not require you to be vulnerable, to be honest, to risk being rejected by someone real. So the fantasy wins again and again, and it guards its own territory by quietly steering you away from the people who could make it unnecessary. And then comes the ending, which is where the story finally says out loud what has been whispering the entire time. After the narrator defeats the bold leader, after he turns the gun on himself and kills off the fantasy, after he takes back control of his own mind, his loyal men bring Marla to him at the top of that building. She is frightened and confused, dragged into the middle of something she does not understand. And the narrator, bleeding from the hole in his face, finally does the thing he should have done in the very first chapter of the story. He sends the men away, the whole army, the entire fake brotherhood, gone with a word. And he turns to the real person, the messy, honest woman who had been there from the beginning, and he takes her hand. Then he says the one thing to her that is true and plain and human. He tells her, simply, that she met him at a very strange time in his life. There is no grand speech, no philosophy, no plan to save the world. Just a broken man holding the hand of another broken person and admitting, honestly, that he is a mess and that the timing of all this was strange. It is the smallest possible gesture, and it is the largest thing he does in the entire film. He chooses the real person over the fantasy. He chooses connection over destruction. He chooses to be honest with someone instead of inventing someone to be honest for him. After 3 hours of fists and fire and grand ideas, the story ends on 2 lonely people holding hands. The buildings fall in front of them as they stand there. The fantasy's last plan still goes through. The destruction still happens. The world still burns. But the narrator is not looking at the fire. He is holding her hand. And that image, that single quiet image of human contact in the middle of the wreckage, is the actual answer the film was offering all along. The cure for the emptiness was never the bold leader. It was never the fights or the brotherhood or the plan to wipe out debt. It was this, a real bond with a real person. The thing the narrator ran from for the entire story. The thing the fantasy fought to keep from him. The thing that was standing off to the side, available the whole time. Tie this back to everything the story got right about the sickness, and it clicks into place perfectly. The film diagnosed a world of empty buying, hollow work, crushing debt, and above all, deep and growing loneliness. People surrounded by faces and starving for a single real one. Disposable connections that lasted one trip and vanished. A whole crowd of people feeling like faded copies of each other, untouched and unseen. If loneliness is the heart of the disease, and the story says clearly that it is, then the cure has to be its opposite. The cure has to be connection. Real, honest, difficult, human connection. The kind that asks you to be vulnerable, to admit you are a mess, to reach toward another flawed person and hold on. Not a leader to follow, not a crowd to disappear into, not a fantasy to obey, a hand to hold. The story knew this. It built its entire ending around it. It gave the narrator a real person from the first chapter, and then spent 3 hours showing him chase everything except her, before finally, in the last possible moment, letting him grab her hand. The answer was never hidden. It was sitting in plain sight off to the side, in a woman almost everyone watching the film barely thinks about. Because she is not loud or cool or quotable. Because she does not give speeches or lead armies. Because the real cure never does any of those things. The real cure is quiet and awkward and unglamorous, and it does not make for a good poster on a dorm wall, which is exactly why almost everyone missed it. The fans who fell in love with the bold leader walked right past Marla, the same way the narrator did for most of the film. They wanted the fantasy. They wanted the strong free man with the answers, the brotherhood, the rage turned into purpose. They did not want the quiet hand to hold, because the quiet hand asks something hard of you. It asks you to be honest about being a mess. It asks you to risk reaching toward a real person who might not reach back. The loud cure asks only that you follow. The real cure asks that you grow up. And given the choice, most people, in the film and in the audience and in life, reach for the loud one every single time. That is the deepest layer of the whole story, the thing underneath the diagnosis and underneath the warning. Write about everything because the sickness it named is loneliness, and loneliness is real and spreading. And write about nothing because the cure the bold leader offered was the exact opposite of what a lonely person actually needs. He offered a crowd to vanish into when what heals loneliness is a single real bond. He offered a fantasy to follow when what heals loneliness is the courage to be honest with a real person. He offered destruction when what the narrator needed was a hand. The story handed its audience the true answer in its final image: two flawed people holding on to each other in the dark, and then watched most of that audience walk out, remembering only the man who had spent the whole film keeping those two people apart. So the narrator, in the end, found the cure, but only after the fantasy had nearly destroyed him and everything around him. His mind had been given the easy choice and the hard choice, the loud savior and the quiet hand, and it spent almost the entire story reaching for the wrong one. That reaching is the thing to understand next, because it is not just the narrator's flaw, it is the oldest pull in the human heart. When people feel lost and empty and afraid, they do not usually reach for the quiet, difficult, honest cure standing off to the side. They reach for a savior, a strong, sure voice that promises to carry them, and that hunger to be carried, that ache to hand your life to someone who seems to have the answers, is the very thing that built the bold leader in the first place, and the very thing that made the whole world fall in love with him. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.